Right. So
Hey,
it's
Suzanne.
really a week since, right? Has it been a week since election day? It feels like it's been a month.
I
Literally.
feel like, yeah, I feel like,
Today's
when was
Wednesday.
it? It's a week. It's a week.
It's a week. Today's
Tell
Wednesday.
me, Suzanne, what did you go through those first 12 hours, right? As the results started to come in, what was going on for you?
Okay, can I just say I felt absolutely nothing. I still feel absolutely nothing because I've already been through this and it's called 2016.
Right.
I was with Hillary Clinton's campaign in the Javits Center on election night in New York in 2016. And a few days before that, I was in Pennsylvania because I traveled with her press corps. And so we were on the plane with her. We landed in Pittsburgh. She had an event. We decided not to continue on to the next stop. We stayed and we did some original reporting. We went to a soup kitchen. And you know how the BBC loves its sort of Americana type films. And so I'd found this place which was so Americana. It was like TV gold. It had factories with the smoke just billowing in a beautiful blue sky, and there was snow. And I'd found this soup kitchen, and there were people lining up to get their soup. And I went down the line and I interviewed each person with my microphone, and everybody was voting for Trump. And I went back to my team and I said, because I don't know if Hillary Clinton's got this in the bag. And they're like, what are you talking about, mate? Look at the polls. Australian. I know that was a terrible, terrible attempt at an Australian accent. But anyway, so then I kind of doubted myself. I was like, yeah, maybe they're probably right. I'm sure she'll win. So, this time around, and I think I told you, after I was in Chicago at the DNC, there was
Yeah.
all this hype, but I was like, "Ew," like, it feels like 2016. It feels like being in Philadelphia, except actually less energy. Because with that, with Hillary Clinton being the nominee, she was the first woman. Like, there was actually a lot more energy around her than there was around Hillary Clinton in Chicago. I mean, I'm sorry, Kamala Harris in Chicago. And so, I wondered if she could keep up the Kamala momentum. So I kind of vacillated. I was like, he's gonna win, he's gonna win. And then I was like, maybe she'll eke it out. I think actually she'll eke out a win. But it'll be tight and it'll be tight. And then what happened? I actually was at the Washington Post election party this time around. My first time not in the field, because in 2020 I was in Georgia, my home state of Georgia, which ended up completely turning around an upset with Joe Biden winning, turning the state blue. Very, very serious Republican state, but voted for a Democrat president. So this time around, I was not in the field. I was covering for, our own channels, getting Helmet to Heels going. I was doing News with Sue's coverage, which is where people were following the election on social media, especially Instagram. We saw that CNN in particular's numbers were down by 50%. That's wild. And so anyway, it was interesting being kind of around legacy media and having them all be wrong again. And it just goes to show that this bubble that journalists live in is very hard to pop. And unless you step outside of your comfort zone and go and talk to real people that don't look like you, they don't sound like you, and they don't think like you, you're not
Right.
going to be able to accurately report on the country. And so not only did Kamala Harris lose, she also lost the electoral vote. She also lost the popular vote, which that is very surprising.
First time in 20 years that a Republican has won the popular vote.
Yeah. And I've done a lot of writing around this. There's a rejection of fake. And for better or for worse, Donald Trump is not seen as fake. And Kamala Harris was seen as inauthentic. And quite frankly, one wouldn't be surprised if she wasn't really able to truly be herself for a number of reasons. One, we still live in a world where women are held to a different standard in positions of power and leadership, regardless of what that industry is. And also, she was in a primary. She didn't get chosen. She was thrown into the election cycle because Joe Biden completely bombed a debate, and then there was basically this coup within the Democratic Party to overthrow him and place Kamala Harris in. I mean,
Yeah.
Biden was not going to beat Trump. And in fact, if 2020, in 2020, if COVID hadn't have happened, Trump would have won again.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, but look, let's examine. Let's take. Let's. I think a lot of people are doing some navel gazing, some analysis. Let's examine what the fault lines are in American voting right now. Right. So, from what I can see, let's get the list started. Right. There's the woke and the anti-woke. Right. There's one dividing line. But what are the other dividing line? You've got the new Secretary of State for Defense. What's his name? Exif, from Fox News.
Host.
Fox
Right.
News, yeah.
So
So
the Fox
he's
News host
saying,
can be Secretary of Defense, then
yeah, he's coming.
host can be Secretary of State, right?
Yeah. Well, literally, I'm expecting a call any minute. But he says his first thing he says is, "I want to remove the woke agenda from the DoD." So that's one kind of spectrum: woke, anti-woke, whatever you would like to refer. But what are the other spectrums which you think have become evident in this election that divides America? What do you think they are?
Immigration.
But
Immigration.
you mean pro-immigration and anti-immigration?
It is how those who have entered illegally are dealt with, and also how to stop illegal immigration.
Right.
And so I think inflation and the cost of living paired with the migrant crisis,
Yeah.
it became a perfect storm. Because,
Right.
the issue with all of these illegal migrants coming into the country is that cost of living it's very similar to the UK in the sense that cost of living is high. And at the same time, you're looking around and you're seeing handouts to migrants. Also, migrants will do, like illegal migrants will do jobs for cash, which then takes jobs away from the working class. So there's that too. But what they haven't really thought through is like, okay, there's been this talk of mass deportations, right? Because there's this idea that these migrants are coming in and they're taking American jobs. But the fact of the matter is, like a lot of these dreamers, the ones who have come in illegally but are in the process of being able to get naturalized. A lot of these farms and these working class jobs are in fact run by these people that are in the crosshairs.
Yeah,
But at the same time,
they have an economic impact, right? Because they keep inflation down. They create perhaps as many jobs as they take, possibly more.
exactly.
But what else is there? I mean, like we heard a lot about the sort of male female divide
Which
in this
actually
election. It
wasn't
turns out didn't happen, right?
we thought this was like battle of the sexes, that's
Yeah,
how it was kind of framed. This
but that turns
come
out
to
not to be the
America.
case.
No, because a ton of women voted for Trump. And there are a number of reasons why women in particular voted for Trump. And it's not necessarily because of abortion and reproductive rights, because I think we're underestimating the fear that mothers and parents here have found themselves feeling when it comes to the woke agenda. So, like, the
Right, and
issue
that's
in
back
the
to the.
bathrooms
You want, is that part of the sort of this and I've experienced this with friends of mine whose children questioned their assigned gender at birth. And I see the turmoil that one particular friend, one mother, she's going through because she feels that what was son but now is unclear, and even they are uncertain sometimes male, sometimes female, but how they are being manipulated online by some very sort of persuasive forces. That's her. That's her. That's her approach to it. Not approach. That's her kind of understanding of it.
Well, it's also there. I mean, obviously, being a teenager is so terrible. Like, remember being a preteen and a teenager? That was
Right.
so
Okay. And
terrible.
we didn't know who we were. We didn't know what we were. I mean, like, if you ask me now, am I the same person that I was, 307 years ago? Not at all.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
and, and,
this has
and
become
yeah,
something that's kind of cool. So I
yeah.
was talking to a friend of mine whose daughter is in high school now,
So,
and basically, it's cool to be gender fluid.
yeah,
So you could be getting bullied, okay? And then suddenly you come out and you decide that you're gender fluid and you're not bullied anymore because actually
yeah,
that's kind of cool.
yeah.
And
But
so
this
it's
is
a
this
huge
context
horrible
changes,
experience. It's confusing.
right? So the woke, anti-woke, whatever it is, however you want to describe it, the sort of whether it's gender related or
Women and
sexuality,
men,
sexual
like men in women's
orientation,
bathrooms,
yeah,
men in
all of
women's
yeah,
sports. There's that part. I mean, this is like because I've been having conversations with a lot of people over the last week to kind of get a sense of the lay of the land.
and
And what's really
and
interesting is on Instagram, you have like, I think the difference between reporting for the BBC, for example, where I was for over a decade, and now where I have a direct connection to the audience, I'm getting a much clearer, honest picture. And this is why I wasn't, I'm not surprised. The only thing that shocked me was by how much he won.
so let's come to that now, Suzanne, because I think this is also a really interesting issue, which is how you mentioned it before, legacy media, new media, who is who is on the pulse, who understands this, and who is believed. And we saw, the Democrats really understood this for this election, right? They really got behind the social media. Like when you were at the DNC, you said to me that, the legacy media had this dingy sort of place miles away, whereas the influencers, they were all had this prime real estate within the DNC to get access to. So the Democrat Party already understands that, there's this kind of new way of communicating with their audiences and they have to get with it. Um, and but Trump had already moved on to the next stage, which is not just to not just to manipulate and use those channels, but to own them.
Mm-hmm.
Like with Elon Musk, with Truth Social, he's already one step ahead. I've got my own channels,
Exactly.
where I'm communicating, or I'm using this to influence and change
But
kind of
it's a community. But he's built a community. The MAGA crew has built a community.
right.
And
It's a
that is
movement,
what's
right?
important.
Yeah. So, but your anxiety and mine too has been that the people who have this power, not just people who own the channel, people who are influencing, have full grasp of the subject matter that they are talking about.
Mhm.
And that may change over time, but at the moment, what we're getting is kind of people talking about issues in big handfuls, without really a feel for the depth or the nuance or the sophistication or the complexities. They're potentially oversimplified. And whilst the situation, if you like, whilst we're debating, the outcome of the debate doesn't really matter. It's when you implement the outcome of the debate, it turns out you're wound wrong, that situation comes to bite us, right? You analyze the situation, you simplified it, you said, this is obviously true. You take an action as a consequence. And then because your analysis is wrong or poor, something else about the system hits you, which you weren't anticipating. So I think what I'm interested in is, legacy media has perhaps a deeper understanding of these subjects, but no audience or a dwindling audience. So the new media has a growing audience, or perhaps even the majority, but lacks the understanding of the nuance.
hmm
Um,
But but the
what
reason why
happens?
they might, okay,
Hmm?
so here's the concern. And I found this in because I'm obviously somebody who has significant level of expertise in various topics. So the stuff that I do talk about, I make sure I know what I'm talking about. The issue is that nuance doesn't do well in new media. It doesn't stick. So like part of my problem is figuring out how to get the nuance and the context and the calm information out there in a sea of chaos and anxiety and noise. And what the Trump team did, so I asked for interviews with both Kamala Harris and with Donald Trump because I was a political reporter here in Washington for a long time. And, I have good contacts in both camps. And the Trump team said, honestly, and they were forthcoming about the fact that they were focused on men. And they asked me, what are your demographics? Like, where are the men in your demographics? And I actually do have, I have like, I think usually you're either one or the other on social media, but I actually do have a fairly down the middle male female audience. But they were focused on men. And clearly they were right to do that as a political strategy. And Kamala Harris was focused on swing states. She was doing local TV interviews. She did the Call Her Daddy podcast and she did a few other podcasts, but they didn't really slap, as the kids say. They
Uh,
didn't they didn't really work. And a lot of that is because, quite frankly, the podcasting world skews right. And there are more men who are podcasters. That's why we have the term podcast bros than women, which we need to change, obviously. And I do think a lot of that has to do with, like, I think women inherently, in the US at least, are less likely to put themselves out there. It's a less natural thing for women to do, and it comes down to confidence and how girls grow up and what their relationship with confidence is. So anyway, that's like a whole other story. But at the end of the day, we're in a really dangerous place where people have their own versions of the truth. I don't know if you've seen, but the Department of Education, Trump has announced that he's going to get rid of the Department of Education. And somebody was messaging me from Dubai today saying, well, what exactly does this mean? And I said, well, it means that each state can decide what the kids are taught in school. And so in one state, the kids can be taught that slavery happened. And in another state, the kids can be taught that slavery didn't happen. I mean, like that is where we're at. There isn't a governing, if there is no Department of Education, there will be no governing standard that schools have to abide by. I mean, that is the point of having a federal government. And I mean, the Republican Party is all about small government and freedom, and which is, I mean, we love freedom. That's why we're Americans. At the same time, if there needs to be some level of a guardian force. I mean, it's like why we have a police force.
it's freaking me out. Uh,
Yeah, I mean it sounds a bit dystopian where people live in their own will live. I mean, I don't want to be like people can potentially live in their own reality. That is what is happening. I mean, when you have conversations, like people genuinely believe things that are shocking. I was thinking about water today. I was thinking about our water because in Dubai, the water makes people's hair fall out. I'm not sure why. I don't know what's in it. When I lived there, I was just shedding. And like as a woman, this is just like really distressing. And I remember asking my friends, I feel like my hair's falling out because of the water. And they said, "Oh yeah, that happens to everyone." And meanwhile, here we have people say, like, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK, is going to come and be in charge of our health, make America healthy again. And there's all this stuff in our water and we're going to fix it. And I'm just like, Americans have no idea how good we have it. No idea.
So let's look forward and let's think about what the next 4 years would look like. And how I think there are two questions here.
I
The
guess
first question is,
your face is cutting off.
my face is cutting off.
Yeah, you're like,
I think that was the effect that your narrative was having on me. I was like,
I
oh,
was making you like fall over, like, oh
yeah.
no. No, that's positive.
But,
I just
so
know.
look, there are two questions here. The first is, how do you think Trump and his team really is what they are really going to do as opposed to what they say they're going to do? Because those things could be potentially very different, like getting rid of the Department of Education. There may be a bunch of more moderate Republicans that would not agree with that, and whether they would have the conscience to stand up and defend it or not, we'll wait and see. But and then there are things that, for instance, the promise to deport tens of millions of undocumented migrants is evidently going to fail. The largest deportation ever achieved was up to 500,000 in a year. That required monumental resources, which even the U.S. government probably doesn't have. The total U.S. prison population is 1.9 million. So if you want to incarcerate 30 million undocumented migrants, you're looking at concentration camps across the country. And imagine, those things aren't static, undynamic things. They become violent, and they become, nobody wants them on their back,
Well, and it's
back
expensive, and
lawn.
the Republican Party
It's
is all about
expensive, exactly. So,
the.
like we know that migrant policy is completely unachievable. It's completely impossible.
Mm.
It's not just, it's just utterly fanciful. And even if it was implemented, it becomes so toxic and unpopular very, very quickly, and would undo the Trump administration very quickly. So we know that there are policies that were if you like, spoken for election purposes, and that they will translate into something slightly different. And I suspect what, you know, Trump would like to see is some kind of resistance to his policies, which he knows are dumb, which he can then blame on the system, if you like, and he can rail at the system,
Which
which
could happen.
he loves to do. And he did that with when the Senate and Congress were making his plans for the wall with Mexico last time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of one question is like, what will the Trump administration actually do, and how will they manage these kind of slightly strange and incoherent, probably mutually contradictory policies that they have? We're going to impose tariffs, but we're going to keep inflation down. Those two things can't happen at the same time. Anybody with even a sort of freshman credit in economics can tell you that. And then what is the Democrat response? And I think there again, let's divide that up into like, what is the response from the Democratic Party, and then what is the response from people like you and me who are just watching this? Some of us who have skin in the game, and others, i.e., live in America, live and breathe this, exposed to this raw. And then what about people who are perhaps still have skin in the game, but are kind of at one remove, kind of perhaps slightly insulated, but also have little to no control over it? What does it mean for us all, and how do we cope with it? That's a lot of questions all at once, but what do you think?
So I've been getting some really interesting DMs from my followers asking me for advice on how to calmly and rationally talk to their friends who are just beside themselves at the results. Which I mean, I was touched that I got these messages asking for advice. And I mean, my response was that we have to hold space for their feelings. Like, again, like, it's about It's about individual realities and the truths that they believe. Okay, so we can rationally say, look, the chances of there being mass deportations, the way it's being painted, are slim. But we're not people who are going to be immediately affected by this, and we have to think about that. And so I think eventually people will calm down, but there will be people who don't. And the reason for that is the issue with legacy media is that rage bait is what has been keeping their business model going. And at this point, they don't have any better ideas. I mean, if you watch these cable news shows, it's just TV pundits sitting there and screaming about anything and everything. The fact of the matter is, if there's peace and harmony, what are they? They're not going to have jobs. They're not going to have work. What are they going to sit and scream and complain about? So there's that. And so I think, like, actually, people like us shouldn't be giving them oxygen, or the people who are freaking out oxygen. We need to hold space for them, but we also need to show a path forward. And so I've been talking about this a lot on my channels, saying, like, okay, we need to come together. I'm not diminishing your feelings, but the people have spoken. The American people wanted Donald Trump. Period. They had their reasons. To sit here and to, not talk to your friends who voted for Donald Trump. How is that helpful? It's not helpful. We're just further dividing ourselves. And I tweeted this. I said, national security is a bipartisan issue, because do you know what? Our adversaries are not looking at our political parties. So being divided is just handing them a win on a silver platter.
Yeah. I always used to talk about with my teams, like, if you were one of our adversaries and you were watching us in this conversation, would you be pleased or would you be frightened? What do you want them to feel? And then choose your path from there.
It's interesting. I was speaking to an American diplomat, and I'm curious your perspective as a former diplomat. How would you, like, if you were an American diplomat, or if this had taken place in the UK when you were still working in the Foreign Office, how would you have felt having to explain this to your foreign counterparts?
I had to do this with Brexit.
Excellent. Let's hear it.
So first is that you have to expunge the shame, right? You just have to get it out of your system. You just have to, and it's about accepting that this has happened. This is a sort of democratic process. The people have spoken, and I'm a Democrat, and therefore I go. The second is to try somehow or other to understand the underlying reasons as to why the people have spoken this way. What is it that they're really saying? And to acknowledge that maybe the way that I saw it, that was flawed, right? That there was a big truth that I was not, either I didn't see or I wasn't acknowledging, or that I had misinterpreted. We tend to, as a rationalist, right? You tend to think of that what is true, right? What is demonstrably true, and how can I sort of work with that? And then you start to establish your truths, which, having established them, you kind of don't re-examine them, because that would take too long each time. So you just go, well, now I know that's true. I know that's true. These are my foundations, and I'm going to build on and build on and build on and build on. You end up at a place which is kind of, to some people, completely unrecognizable. Now, you could be right, but the point is it's unrecognizable. Because they haven't seen you build what you haven't accepted your foundations. So they've ended up in a different place. And what we don't think about much as rationalists is how other people feel, and how that feeling determines their actions. And I think that that's what happened in Brexit, and that's what happened this time, is that there's a large chunk of America, as there was a large chunk in the UK, the majority of it felt a different way. And it doesn't really matter why, or whether they were right or whether they were wrong, but they felt them. And they took action as a consequence.
And a lot of people went into that voting booth not
Yeah,
actually being 100% sure who they were going to vote for.
sure. And then they took,
Looking at the
yeah,
ballot and
yeah,
how they felt about the names that they saw, that is
yeah.
what they checked.
There was a CNN poll, and it was reflected by a few others, that 70% of people coming out of those voting booths, when they were asked what their primary emotion was when they were voting, they said it was anger. And that was the first statistic that I saw around about 1:30 a.m. UK time. So it must have been whatever
Why do
that
you think that
is.
is? Rage bait.
But the point is that people were angry about their circumstances, and therefore
Yep.
they wanted to change it, and therefore they went for what they saw perceived as change.
Yep. Well, and
And they weren't
that has been just pervasive throughout
right.
American society, and
And
it's
that's what Brexit
worse.
was all about as well. And I think that I don't dispute that some people thought about it with a calm head and concluded that Brexit was the right thing to do. I know that a lot of intelligent people did that, and I'm not going to sort of, it would be hubristic of me to suggest that they were wrong, although.
Well, a lot of them are
Uh,
now saying that they were wrong.
yeah, a lot of them would say,
Voted
but
for
the point
president
is that
saying, "Oh, we didn't know what we were voting for."
a lot of people, yeah, the majority of people who voted, and on both sides, I think, not just for Brexit, but people who voted to remain voted with their gut and not their brain.
And the
Or if you
UK
like it.
is just, I am shocked. Every time I go back to the UK, it just feels like it's just getting worse and worse.
Well, I somehow or other have to disagree with you because I live here, and if I said I agree with you, then that would make me feel miserable. So I have
I
to
mean,
say that.
yeah, I totally get it. I get it.
But you asked me how, as a UK official, did I deal with um, the sort of dissonance, the cognitive dissonance between what I felt inside and what was I was having to defend. And it was really, really difficult. And it took me quite a few weeks to, if not longer actually, to kind of process the grief that I was feeling and the disbelief. I think the grief had many stages. There was disbelief. There was all the stages of grief, really, disbelief, bargaining, all the things all the
Yeah.
stages of grief you go before you reach acceptance. I think I've reached acceptance much faster with this one because, it was it is. If I get upset about it, all I'm going to do is keep myself up and my wife up at night. That's not good for either of us, and it certainly doesn't change who's sitting in the White House. It doesn't change his policies. So you basically got to acknowledge that we are in a situation, that situation has contours that are pretty solid and hard to move, and therefore you need to pick the route through it that you think is going to be profitable for you, whatever that is, whether that be short, medium, or long term, whether that be narrow or broad. But you have to accept the contours of the situation as it currently stands and make the most of it. That's what we have always had to do as human beings. Those who do it survive and thrive. Those who don't fail. And so I think I don't have the answer, by the way. I don't know what that route is. But I know that people who are able to think about that, even if they fundamentally disagree with the outcome of this election, if they are able to think like that, then they will get through it. Accept it as it is. Decide what it is that you want, whether that be for yourself, for your community, for your country. Decide what it is that you can actually do in the circumstances that will be successful, and then do that.
What I'm finding disturbing is people who want Trump to fail to be proven right. And I'm like, that's not good for
That doesn't
anyone.
help anybody. That just makes it even worse.
Yep.
And really what the Democrats have to do and what people who are upset about, we really need to start fighting the next election right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I
That's
just
your
think that
opportunity.
we are so divided. People can't talk to each other. Speaking of nuance
Yeah.
online, there's no nuance in person.
Look,
Oh, and I have always been a bipartisan, nonpartisan journalist, and so I've had all kinds of different friends and contacts from different walks of life. And actually, this might sound surprising, but I have found that my Democrat friends have been the least tolerant and have been annoyed
uh,
that I have friends who are Republicans. And that's just counterintuitive, counterproductive.
yeah.
The Democratic Party loves to preach inclusivity unless you vote for Trump.
Unless you disagree with
What?
me. Well, that's what happens when we become tribal,
And
isn't it?
that's what's happening. We are becoming so tribal. And we like to talk about, all these other places in the region, in the world, in the Middle East, and talk about tribalism and how does Hezbollah happen? How does Hamas happen? I know this is extreme, but quite frankly, those are the extreme versions of tribalism. And like
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about the level of division that we're experiencing here.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned.
So what's our message, Suzanne? If there is even anybody out there who's listened this far to what we've been talking about, what is it that we think, as we perhaps wrap this up, what is it that we think that we'd like to see? What is it that we can do that, takes us forward from where we are now?
We need to stop acting like children, fighting each other in the playground, and recognize that we are stronger together against the other school. Plain and simple.
And I
National
would help.
security is a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, 100%. And I would add one more thing, which is you said that talking to people on the other side of the fence, right? I would nuance that to say, let's listen to each other.
Yeah.
Let's try to understand each other a little bit, because that's the only thing that's going to start to dissolve the boundaries. If I talk too much, then I'm just that person. I don't even know whether that person's hearing what I'm saying. I don't know whether they're interested. And I may be pushing them away. But if I listen to them, then there is a chance we'll find some connection.
I mean, part of the dangers in being hyper connected and having so many different forms of communication, so many different platforms to show up in, is that we're doing a lot of talking and actually not a whole lot of communicating. We're not getting through to
Yeah,
each other.
and yeah, 100%. And you only do that if you know what the other person is interested in, right? And you only do that if you listen. And that's why I think what you have done so well is to get out there and listen to people, just talk, actually listen, ask a question, listen to what's coming back, and not trivialize their response.
And now we need tangible deliverables. That's what
Yeah.
we need.
Okay. That
Until
sounds
next
interesting.
time.
Until next time. Yeah. Well, we're going to need some other cataclysmic event to discuss. I'm sure the world can stir one
There's
up
not going
for
to
us.
be anything. There's not going to be. We're not going to be short of things to talk about.
I don't think so. Yeah.
No.
We didn't even get into all the sort of foreign policy issues. Maybe we can tackle those once we know what kind of team Trump has assembled around him.
Yeah,
Oh
it's all
my
coming
goodness.
together now. So once we have the team, we can
Yeah.
go through it.
All right.
All right. Thank you.